Good morning and welcome. Welcome to First Parish Brewster Worship. We are so glad you are here this morning. So good to be together on this 4th of July. So welcome to First Parish Brewster. We are a Unitarian Universalist welcoming congregation of people of diverse philosophies and beliefs, people of various cultures and races, sexual orientations, gender identities, abilities, and socioeconomic backgrounds. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your path, may this be a place of rest and restoration on your journey. For those of you who may be first-time visitors this morning, welcome. Welcome on this morning, which we make sacred by our presence together. If you're visiting, please let us know in the chat box. A big welcome to Oak Ridge Unitarian Universalist Church visitors all the way from Tennessee. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're so glad you are here. I'm Reverend Jessica Clay, the minister of First Parish Brewster. Happy to be welcoming you to the service this morning with our admin and finance director, Karina Stroh, on tech support. Our service does have closed captioning, but you need to turn it on in your taskbar. Our services are recorded and available on our YouTube channel midweek, and the chat box will be on throughout this service as well. Welcome to worship. It is so good to be together. So next we have reflections on patriotism from members of First Parish Brewster. I asked people to send me video reflections on what patriotism is to them, and this was some of their responses.
Patriotism to me means great gratitude and love for a country that allows voices which have been marginalized and erased in history to be centered and lifted up so that we can see ourselves as a nation truthfully and more clearly with all our flaws and all our strengths.
Patriotism is our obligation to make our country the best it can be, to make it live up to the ideals we'd like to think it represents. All the things we were taught as kids that we know now are not true. If we're patriots, our obligation is to try to make our country better.
Hi, I'm Bruce Evans. Patriotism is loving your country, but a lot of it is how you show it. And if you're on Facebook, I think a good way to show it is just not pass along a lot of that negative stuff.
Patriotism, to me, means being kinder to each other, less violence, and just really helping each other out, loving each other, being the America that I grew up in from a long time ago. Let's make that happen. Let's see that wonderful America again. That is what patriotism means to me. Strong, brave, and freedom. Thank you.
To me, patriotism is or should be believing in the dignity and worth of every human being and governing, having laws that support that. Thank you.
What does patriotism mean to me? It doesn't mean to me driving around in a pickup truck with a big American flag on the back. It doesn't mean showing up to a political rally in an army vehicle. What comes to me is during the Mexico City 1968 Olympics when Tommie Smith and John Carlos stood on the podium with gold and bronze medals, facing the American flag, listening to the American anthem, and raising a black glove the entire time, because their rights weren't the same as others in this country. And I think of Colin Kaepernick kneeling for the American anthem at a football game, because his rights aren't the same either. I think what patriotism means to me is striving for everyone to be equal in this country and working like crazy to make it happen.
For me, the flag behind me stands for justice, equal opportunity, and freedom of expression. But some people seem to use it as a symbol of imperialism, intolerance, and white supremacy. Therefore, every time I display this flag, I also display it in tandem with the pride flag so that people know just which side I stand on. Thank you very much.
Patriotism, it used to be so easy and so stirring to feel it. As a young kid watching fireworks on the 4th of July, singing the national anthem at the ballpark, saying the Pledge of Allegiance at school. As a parent, making imaginative costumes for my kids at the neighborhood annual 4th of July parade, and visiting the monuments in Washington, D.C., seeing the Statue of Liberty from the Circle Line boats in New York. But as I grew older, I became painfully aware of the injustices perpetrated by my country in the name of values I was less and less likely to support. Ideas like manifest destiny. I developed a growing understanding of the devastation wreaked on so many by slavery and settler colonialism and unnecessary wars. And I became more and more uncomfortable with knee-jerk American slogans and mindless displays of patriotism. I stopped singing the national anthem at sports events. How did that ever get started anyway? Now I feel nothing but ambivalence. I love the ideals of America, but am deeply ashamed of the ways in which they have been realized only for a select few, myself included. I feel that the American flag should be flown at half-mast as long as this is the case. In 1935, Langston Hughes said the words much more beautifully and authentically than I. Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe.
Thank you to everyone who sent in videos. Patriotism is complicated, right? And on this 4th of July, I'm sitting with this thought of what does it really mean to love your country, flaws and all? Growing up, my family was never really particularly patriotic. We would do barbecues for the 4th of July and, do fireworks. I never remember an American flag being hung at our house, and yet we didn't particularly feel one way or the other about the American flag. In elementary school, I have clear memories of saying the Pledge of Allegiance every morning without ever really thinking about it. And as some of you may be aware, this year marks the 20th anniversary of September 11th. And on that tragic day, we as a nation, our relationship to the American flag changed forever. The American flag became a symbol of patriotism in a way it hadn't before. It was the symbol that was originally meant to unite, and yet it divided. Now, that's not to say that people on the margins didn't have a complicated relationship with the flag before this. But a very strong marketing campaign came out immediately after the tragic events of September 11th, which almost forced people to be on the side of being a patriot, to unite together against terrorists. And as we all know, it fueled a lot of hate against Muslim and Middle Eastern people. And there was no room for critique in the way things were being handled. And in the years since, I have a reaction to the flag in a way that I never did the 20 years prior. I noticed that after September 11th, that all of a sudden we were saying the Pledge of Allegiance before baseball games, before town meetings. It felt very strange and forced. That patriotism, a particularly white form of patriotism, was being put upon us. It's been hard to love this country at many moments in the years since. And for the last 4 years, my sermon on the 4th of July said, our administration may represent many people in this country, but it doesn't represent our values as Unitarian Universalists. And here we are in 2021, having come out of a pandemic. We aren't fully out of it yet, but we're emerging out of that. And we also are coming out of having gone to the polls in record numbers and encouraging people on the margins to go to the polls in record numbers to use their voices to vote their values. And our administration has changed. And yet, voter rights are being taken away at record levels. White supremacy is still asserting itself at the highest levels of government. And patriotism is still complicated. I agree with what many of our members said in the reflections earlier, and I agree with what Richard Blanco said. He said, to know a country is to forgive it. He said, to know a country takes all we know of love. Some days better than others, but never easy to keep our promise every morning of every year of every century and wake up, stumble downstairs with all our raging hope, sit down at the kitchen table again, still blurry-eyed, still tired, and say, listen, we need to talk. This is patriotism. Listen, we need to talk. Listen, we have work to do. This congregation working to get out the vote last year, this congregation adopting the 8th principle, this congregation working for reparations, working to know our history, this is patriotism. The work of building the community that we dream about, building the world that we dream about, is patriotism. And so many ancestors have done this before us, who have fought to get out the right to vote for women, for people of color, for people who have been imprisoned. This is patriotism. So every day when you say yes to this country, when you exercise your right to vote, when you call your elected representatives, when you run for office because you want to make a difference, this is how to love your country. And remembering that you are part of this lineage of, you have ancestors who came before you, who said, this is how you love your country. 2 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were Unitarians. The 2nd and 6th President of the United States were Unitarians. These ancestors are in our religious lineage, defining what patriotism means and remembering that they certainly were not perfect. Yet they were striving for liberal religious values, striving for democracy. And today, as we work for a more just, equitable system, a system that many of those white men created, we also acknowledge that women in our lineage have done a lot of this work and are often left out of history. Women like Lydia Maria Child, who is an abolitionist with the Transcendentalists in Boston. Women like Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who was a prolific writer, lecturer, and reformer, and refused to give up her seat on a Philadelphia streetcar long before Rosa Parks. As we reflect on patriotism this July 4th, I invite you to be mindful of who in your history has inspired you to activism, inspired you to work for the world that you dream of, and to really reflect on what you hope your legacy is for others. How are you hoping to inspire others? I have this favorite quote that Mr. Rogers says, where he says, we leave a piece of ourselves with everyone we meet. And so in remembering that the truest example of a patriot is someone who moves in the world with kindness, with compassion, and who works for equity and justice, we are leaving pieces of ourselves with everyone we meet, because we are all connected in this interdependent web. Our work is not done this July 4th. There is much more work to be done, and yet we've come so far. Let us give thanks for these ancestors. Let us give thanks for the work we have done and commit to continuing to do that work in the future. This can be on a congregational level, such as making a congregation-wide, a leadership-wide annual commitment to doing anti-racism workshops and study. This can look like inclusive name tags with our pronouns on them. Please fill out that pronoun survey. This can look like an audit of our bylaws, our curriculums in our children and youth ministries programs with an anti-racism and countering oppressions lens. And this can look like doing your own personal work to dismantle the systems of oppression that you have inherited to make the world a more just and equitable place. This can look like researching your own history to see if your ancestors participated in the enslavement of people of color. It can also look like looking at where and how you spend your money, to what and whom are you supporting. We each have our own inner work, and then we have our work as communities to do this. This is what patriotism is calling us to on this 4th of July. To know and love a country is to say, I love you, I forgive you, and we have work to do. Amen and blessed be.